let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to start with Andy. We're going to allow each of the panelists to give their predictions and challenges for principals. So, Andy, please.
Nathaniel, thank you, and thank you for your great coverage and the work you do helping people understand what we're up to. It's great to be here. Randy, thank you for the invitation. A few times I've wanted to come and scheduling hasn't worked, so I'm really glad that I can be here this year. And I want to start by just saying thanks to all of you for what you do. I feel like a lot of the conversations we have in education, as a former superintendent, well before Scott of Fairfax used to say the main thing is the main thing and keep the main thing the main thing. That was Bud Spillane. And often these conversations that are happening in education, not just in the Commonwealth, but around the country, really get divorced from what it is that you guys do every day, which is educate kids. So I do come to say thank you. Also, nothing I say should be taken as a position of the board. I'm here as one board member, so if you like it, that's great. If you don't, just blame me. I've got a couple of slides. I'm going to try to be brief. Although I understand. Usually you'd say like we're standing between you guys and lunch, but I think we're the only thing standing between you all and a governance meeting. So maybe that'll maybe you'll actually want to hear more from us. I'm going to try to be really brief with just a couple of slides. I'm going to frame up 5 challenges. I'll mention some problems. There's a lot of wisdom on this panel. There's loads of wisdom in this room, so I want to be brief so we can have a more interactive session. Nothing that I say. I want to frame with one thing. I'm going to point out 5 areas where I think we have a ways to go and do, but I am a firm believer decline is a choice. It is not it is not an axiomatic fact of life. We have choices in front of us, and I am a firm believer that a state, a Commonwealth that produced, Thomas Jefferson, Barbara Johns, that we can meet these challenges, and I actually think our best days of public education in Virginia are in front of us, not behind us. But these are choices. So as I talk about these challenges, keep that in mind. I think they are all they can all be met, and decline is a choice. You guys have these slides, so I'll go through very quickly. First big challenge: we don't have enough kids. So you've got a couple of things happening. You have declining enrollment. The pandemic accelerated that substantially. And we've got a demographic problem. People are having fewer kids. I'm not doing my part. I only have 2. So my wife and I, we're below replacement rate as well. This is a demographic challenge that's happening not just in Virginia, but around the country. It's hitting different states differently. We're going to have to think about how do we have a system with fewer kids, and what does that mean? Second, look, we got a nice boost out of COVID nationwide. Marguerite Rose estimates that we've seen $5 billion a month in extra purchasing power as a result of the federal dollars. They are drying up. They've made a difference here in Virginia, but we're still basically just getting back to where we were. And as you all know all too well, like JLARC, we have serious issues with funding our schools. You'd like to see those addressed in a bipartisan manner. Schools, I was just talking to somebody earlier, schools in this state, it is, if you drive around, you don't have to drive far to see how highly inequitable our funding is, and communities can tax themselves to death and still not get where they need to be. We have some very high wealth counties with relatively little tax effort can provide incredible support for their schools. I split my time. I live part-time in Falls Church, Virginia, and part-time in Madison, so I see this just very viscerally in my own life. We are going to have to take on this challenge of how do we have a finance system that works better for the Commonwealth. People want choice. It is, I'm not telling you all anything you don't know. It's incredibly controversial in this state for a bunch of reasons. We can talk about that. Parents want choice, options, customization. We have this incredible holy war about TJ and who gets into TJ, when the question we should be asking is, in a state like ours and in a county like Fairfax, why do we only have one TJ? Why is this the big fight? Why don't we have many more choices and options for kids? People want different things in education. They want traditional core knowledge kinds of schools. They want Montessori. They want different themes. We're seeing this elsewhere. part of getting people to come back, those numbers I showed you about people leaving, is making sure what we have on offer is absolutely compelling and that we are bringing people into public education by offering compelling options. Sorry, they gave me a tutorial on how to use this that I obviously failed miserably. Okay. Fourth challenge, achievement. And we need to be honest about this. Achievement was declining before the pandemic. The pandemic obviously accelerated it, but we were in a decline along with a lot of states pre-pandemic. We were hit hardest among the states in terms of learning loss. We can argue the reasons for that, whatever, but that is a thing. It is a challenge for kids, and it's going to create an echo for kids, particularly in the early grades who may not have gotten the reading instruction they needed. We've got kids who are disconnecting from school. We've got to get serious about achievement. I won't belabor what we're trying to do at the board on the accountability system. If that comes up during discussion, I can talk about how we're bifurcating accountability and accreditation. We have to address this. At the same time, our cut scores on our tests have fallen. This continues, with respect to my friends, to be reported in the media as something that Glenn Youngkin says. This is just a fact. You can look, the commissioner of IES, so the federal government's data and information service, came down and testified before the board about where our cut scores were relative to other states. So this is not sort of a right, left, back and forth. Our cut scores on a number of our tests are now lowest in the country, and they're lower compared to our neighboring states that we have to worry about from a competitive standpoint: Tennessee, North Carolina, Maryland. We've got to get serious about raising the bar for all kids and then addressing these really pervasive achievement gaps, and we can talk about those and these enormous inequities that we see across the system. And then finally, or not, we're a politically, ideologically diverse state, and we've got to address these education. We can't toggle between a Republican and Democratic vision of education. We have to have a Virginia vision of education. And when you get underneath the partisanship, you can see there's a lot of agreement about a bunch of issues that are seen as actually very divisive. There's a guy up at Harvard named Todd Rose. I'd commend his work to. He runs a lab at Harvard and MIT. It's basically about how there's so much more agreement among people than you see sort of reflected in our political class and in our political debates. That is nowhere more true than on education in terms of what parents actually want from schools vis-a-vis these fights we have. And so we have to address these challenges in the context of we're a purple state and we're going to continue to be a diverse state. I think that's actually one of our strengths, is the diversity that exists around this Commonwealth. But our public schools have to be open and available to all kids in all contexts, and we have some work there. So I'll leave it there. I really do look forward to your questions. And again, Randy, thank you so much for having me.
Good morning, everyone. Randy turned off my microphone. All right. So what I did was I have 5 predictions and challenges for our job. Randy mentioned my gig right now as principal of Colgan High School. I was principal of Osborne Park High School for 11 years before I went to central office in the assistant superintendent role. So I just finished 20 years as a high school principal between the 2 schools and 35 years in public education in Virginia. So mine are real practical. But with each challenge, I've also come up with a couple of solutions that I hope will help. And I could probably speak for an hour on each one of these. I'm not going to, clearly. I'm going to do them very succinctly. So number 1 prediction, the need for quality teachers will get worse before it gets better. So the reality is we all know that hard to staff schools has taken on a whole new meaning right now. My school presently would not be what you would traditionally call a hard to staff school, but it is hard to staff. I've had years where we've gone without CTE teachers. If a specialized physics teacher, business teacher resigns in June, you're in trouble. Like, there's nobody out there. And I think I had to really educate my community, like, this is a real thing. This isn't happening somewhere else in the state or country. It's happening right here. And that's a real issue. You guys know that. And so when Todd Whitaker on the first day of the conference says, the two ways to improve our schools are hire better teachers or improve the ones we have. I'm like, there's nobody else out to hire there, Todd. So what are we going to do to make our ones that we have better? So I look at it in three categories. So now I'm transitioning into the solution of this. As a principal, I look at what I'm doing to retain my staff, how I'm recruiting people to my building, and what professional development I'm offering my teachers to make them better. I think number one, as a principal, we have to remember, and when I say principal, of course, I'm including assistant principals as well, because in a large school, a school like mine, my assistant principals are doing a lot of the day-to-day work with those teachers. We have to remember that teaching, when done properly, is a really hard job. And I think sometimes we get disconnected from that. Like our teachers, the ones that are doing the job right, they're working their rear ends off. And we got to remember that and respect that. And so this is another Todd Whitaker ism. He says, make your rules for your best ones, right? And so we talk about that on our admin team all the time. Like, let's not make rules for our staff that punishes all our really good teachers because I have one or two teachers who aren't doing their job properly. We've got to address those teachers. So make your rules for your best one. Don't minimize their important items. And I would caution you against a one-size-fits-all approach to your leadership of teachers in your building. We all talk about diversifying how we teach kids in the classroom, and I think we have to look at that and how we work with our teachers. How I'm working with a 24-year-old or 23-year-old right out of school and how I'm working with a veteran has to be very different. Generationally, experience-wise, all the things, and really got to take that into consideration to keep your teachers in your building. My number two prediction. School climate and culture will become more important than ever in an age of political unrest, divided opinions, and student activism. I've also decided to run for president after watching the debate last night. Anybody else have that feeling? I'm sorry. In my school, over the last several years, I've had student activism, including walkouts over the Middle East, racial injustice, school shootings and violence, transgender rights, abortion rights. And that's becoming our real issue. No longer is it just armbands in the Tinker case we all studied in school law. Student activism has taken on a much more unique role in our schools, and how we keep our school together with this political unrest is really, really important. What complicates it, of course, is our young people are learning about the history of the Middle East through a TikTok video. And so we have to remember that they're getting all this information in these quick little blurbs of stuff that is not always valid, or just bits and pieces of it. And so we take an approach to that. So here's my solutions to that. You got to listen and validate your students. Positional power no longer applies to this generation. I'm the principal, so do it. That doesn't work anymore, right? And so we've got to listen and validate and value the voice of our students. And then we have to teach them how to disagree appropriately, right? I think we see a lot of models around of people yelling and screaming at each other or folding their arms and because you disagree with me, you're the worst person in the world. And so we, in our history classes and our leadership classes, we are deliberate about teaching our kids how to disagree with each other and have different opinions. And then to approach that school culture and climate, we really rally around our school spirit. Now, we have all the traditional sports and the school spirit around sports. We're very good at sports at our school. But we've looked at non-traditional ways to rally school spirit and to boost our culture. We have school spirit around our musicals, multicultural international nights. We make a huge deal about the inclusivity of our schools. Our Fin Friends group, which brings together gen ed students and special ed students, is known across the state. My assistant principal, Dave Parrish, presented on that yesterday at Roundtable. We rally around that at our school. And so we find these ways to rally our kids to focus them in that it's okay that we have difference of opinions, but we're still one school and celebrate our culture. Prediction 3, the expectations and workload of the principalship will continue to get more and more unrealistic. You know this already. On my phone now, I get notification about how hot it is, and if there's lightning around my school, my security cameras, whether a kid has sent a questionable email or an anonymous report has come in 24/7. I was in Ireland last week with my wife. I was getting notified about kids sending emails with questionable stuff in it and what the wet globe temperature was in my field. And I'm trying to be on vacation, right? And so the job just doesn't go away anymore. And so that's a real big issue. I'm very concerned. I've been in the job 20 years. I very question whether people are going to be able to survive the principalship for that type of stability. And the job is almost becoming unsustainable. We're expected to be perfect with little to no mentorship. And so here are my solutions to this. VASSP membership. This organization fights for you as principals and assistant principals. They advocate for you. They lobby for you. They represent you. We need those people, and we need our voice heard at the state level and the national level to make sure people understand and recognize when things are put in place how important that is. And then I would caution you to make sure you put boundaries in place. I tell my staff, and I don't answer emails on weekends, because as soon as you start answering emails on weekends, then people think you're monitoring your email on weekends, right? And so I may look at my email to get ahead, like to get up with my workload, but I don't respond to them. Or if I do, I set it so it response doesn't go to Monday. I don't want people thinking I'm looking at my emails on the weekend, because then that just becomes an expectation. Prediction 4, the pace of technology and its value in our schools will be a never-ending challenge and debate, right? This is a catch-up game. I'm not sure we're ever going to be at an end game in public education. I started in the age that we were suspending kids for pagers, right? And now we're dealing with artificial intelligence and everything in between. Some people think we got to be all in on technology, and some people believe textbooks and pencil and paper is all you need. And we're trying to balance all of that. So here's my solution to that one. Don't support technology just because it's shiny and new, but make people show you why it's better for your kids, right? And I think sometimes we run to the new shiny object and think technology is going to solve all the problems, when the reality is great teachers solve the problems. But technology has its place, and so use your critical thinking, and don't not support technology just because we don't understand it, right? That's also things. There are things that I don't understand with technology. I'm still catching up with artificial intelligence, but I have teachers who love it and are using it, and so I'm supporting them. And then lastly, if we are not careful, the increased pressure to graduate every child, no matter their choices, will lead to unhealthy pressures and ethical dilemmas. Here's my point. There's so much pressure on us now that every kid has to graduate. Graduation rate, graduation rate, graduation rate. It's a real pressure. And we have kids making poor choices all the way through the school year. And so let me be very careful what I'm saying. I'm not talking about the kid who is 1 point away from passing English 12 class to graduate. Those kids we want to work with. Those kids we want to get across the finish line. I'm not talking about the kid who's got all sorts of trauma in his or her life, and we need to support. But let's be careful about lowering the value of a high school diploma in Virginia. When we think that an online program or sitting kids in front of a point-and-click online program substitutes for the value of being in our schools every day, I think we got a problem. And I see that pressure on us as principals, that then we're kind of cascading down to teachers that every kid's got to graduate. And we've got to correct, right? We were in a spot several years ago where not enough kids were graduating, and we were writing off kids too soon. My first year teaching was 1989-90. Yes, I know, I'm old. But, and if kids in the back of my English classroom put their heads down, I let them put their heads down. That's unacceptable anymore, right? Now we got to intervene. So I'm not saying that, but I'm saying let's be careful. If we're not saying, if us as public school leaders is not saying that being in our schools every day with our teachers isn't valuable, that a computer program can substitute for that, if we're not advocating for kids being in school and the value of a public school education, who's going to advocate for that? So that's my last prediction. And so my solution, I forgot my solution on that one. Don't overcorrect by sacrificing academic integrity. Continue to focus on improving our graduation rate, but don't sacrifice the meaning of a high school diploma in Virginia and our academic integrity. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Good morning. Thank you, Nathaniel. Thank you, Randy, for the invitation, and thank you, all of you, for being here. I have 3 challenges and 2 predictions. The first challenge for school leaders is to improve your school. There is nothing harder in education than to improve a school, any school. No matter how it struggles or how successful it is today, there is nothing harder to do in education. Just combine some of the comments that have been shared already, and you get a sense of why it's so difficult. But to begin with that challenge, we have to understand what it is and what it is not. Our states and our regulations and our policies still focus on the plan to improve and all the energy we put into drafting the plan. Continuous improvement is not a plan. It's actually an embedded behavior within the culture of your school. It's a behavior. And the better organizations, the better schools, the better systems have it as an embedded. It's part of the DNA of how things operate. You can write the most impactful school improvement plan on the back of a napkin if it helps change behavior, if it helps guide behavior. But we have states that incorporate a lot of effort into just writing a plan. I think it was the state of Michigan, we did an analysis. Their average school improvement plan for 1 year was 152 pages. For 1 year. Almost a page a day. The average school barely touches their annual school improvement plan, with the exception of those who draft it, because you never get to the embeddedness within the culture of your school to change behavior. And as one of the state superintendents said, student learning will not improve unless adult behaviors change. It's about behavior. The second challenge is school leaders today are leaders in their community. What you need to do is become leaders of your community. Most of your community has either had kids in school, has kids in school, or will have kids in school. And the challenge here is listen to everything that all of you do each and every day, and which you don't do each and every day. And it requires you to change how you go about leading, because you have to get out into that community and be a leader in the community, not just those who are in front of you each and every day. And it may seem as though I don't have time for that. I can't find time for that. It's something that will build equity within your community and will translate into helping you be more effective as a leader of that community. The third challenge is trust. We didn't lose trust in our schools when COVID hit. We actually lost trust in our institutions in this country when 9/11 happened. When 9/11 happened, it broke our sense of invulnerability, our sense of security. Immediately after that, we started to lose trust in our institutions, our governmental institutions, our medical institutions, our educational institutions. You look at the institutional framework of America, and we lost trust on that day. You used to be able to go to the airport in 1999 and bring your spouse or a friend or a cousin or an aunt or an uncle and walk right up to the gate. Today, when you enter an airport, it is in bright lights. We don't trust you. So we live it every single day. And in our schools, when COVID hit, and we did the research on this, there was a dramatic range of responses to COVID in our schools. Some did fairly well, some fell apart. It was either the presence of trust prior to COVID or the absence of trust that determined whether or not that school and community were going to be able to effectively deal with an historic event that disrupted tremendously the daily routines of schools. We must rebuild trust. And the trust isn't in you as a principal. The trust is in what we do. We live in a world today without trust, which means things are either you're right or you're wrong. You're either right about something or you're wrong. And I'm going to line up my belief in you based on whether you're right or wrong. The world isn't right or wrong. It isn't black or white. And as school leaders, oftentimes you are thrust into a situation where you're asked to make a decision, to choose a pathway with about 60% of the information you need to make that decision. As school leaders, one of the things that the challenge is you have to have the resiliency and the patience and the persistence to get 100% of the information before making a decision. Because you need to broker between those competing interests of right versus wrong and find in the middle really where the truth lies. Because it's not just one side is right and one side is wrong. They both have shades of it. And as a leader in your community, a leader of your community, you have to help them find the best pathway forward. 2 predictions. One, and I'm a public school person, as a public school principal in Massachusetts and New England, public school will prevail in this country. Public school is a significant ecosystem. It is in every fabric of the way we live, how we live, and why we live. And it's been around this country since its beginnings. That ecosystem will prevail. Yes, it's being challenged. Yes, it was disrupted mightily during COVID. But as an ecosystem, it will learn to adapt. And even we've gone through declining enrollment before. I'm probably older than everybody on the panel. I remember when I started my teaching career in 1980, we were in declining enrollment. We were in restricted funding. And then Nation at Risk came out in 1983 and completely slammed public education in this country. I went to a high school where 25% of us went on to post-secondary learning. Only 25% in Reading, Massachusetts. And we were considered one of the finest high schools in the state of Massachusetts. Today, if you run a high school with only 25% going on to higher ed, what would be the headline there? So the ecosystem adapted in 1983 to getting more kids graduated and more kids onto a post-secondary experience. Maybe we got too many kids onto post-secondary higher ed 4-year. You're seeing a return of an interest in CTE and other ways in post-secondary experiences for our kids to be prepared. But the ecosystem is resilient and it does know how to adapt. And I do believe that public education will prevail. It's the bedrock of what this nation's economic and day-to-day living are based on. So not only will prevail, it must prevail. The last prediction is, I think we're going to look back in about 20, 30, maybe 40 years. Researchers are really good at going back. And they're going to realize that our kids learned a lot more than we thought they learned. Recently, in the last 5 years, we've acquired 2 assessment companies, not because I believe in large-scale assessment, high-stakes testing, because I actually don't believe in it. But you can't change something from the sideline. What we're measuring today is an inaccurate picture of what our kids are learning today. We continue to measure kids as though they're growing up in an analog world where time and space are the constant in learning. And yet our kids are growing up in a very dynamic digital world where time and space are variables. We continue to test kids on the same day in the same way and expect them to be in their learning on the same day in the same way. And that is not the world they are growing up in. We have to change what we're measuring, how we're measuring it, and why we're measuring it. But I do believe we're going to look back and realize kids were a lot smarter than we gave them credit for, and they learned a lot more than we thought they learned. We just were measuring the wrong things.
Yeah.
Okay. Be sure, let me know when the 10 minutes is up, okay? Good morning, everybody. Hope everyone's good. It's Friday. I hope everybody's excited and that you don't have to go back and do a Friday night sports activity. I was a high school principal for 4 years. I was an associate principal at a middle and high school. And before that, I was an assistant principal at a high school, taking ninth graders through their senior year. So I remember the secondary world, and I was a high school social studies teacher. So middle and high school was most of my life. Let me just say one thing up front. This is still the right work. I know I don't see big smiles right now, but let me just say this. One of my favorite books was Generation X, which is I'm a Generation X, born in 68, by Douglas Copeland. And it was a fictional book, but he was writing about characters, and they said, most people in life have 2 or 3 really interesting stories, and the rest is filler. I was about 23. I was in a corporate job, making a lot of money, and I was unhappy as hell. And I picked up this book at a bookstore at DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C., and started to read it and go, wow, 2 or 3 really interesting stories for the rest of my life, and the rest is filler. I joined a career switcher program through Fairfax County. The first day I walked in, you had to be a substitute for the entire year, and then you took courses at night to be certified. I had 2 or 3 really interesting stories the first day and every day afterward. I get to meet people all over the state and the world, and I know you do too. I go to parties, many of you do too. I'm not going to say other people's lives are empty or horrible, but there is no more filling life than being an educator with young people in a school. That is the most, if you want to be a part of eternity, the biggest part of doing that, the biggest part of impacting the universe is still being around kids in a school. So I still think it's the greatest privilege to be able to do, and it's the most important thing for the future of American democracy, to be in public education. So keep on keeping on. Don't let the news or a few people determine your feelings about what you do. And we have to own our own narrative about who we are, what we do, and we're proud of what we do, and what we're doing is good. So I just say that. Read that book if you never read it. You all have enough books you could crank out now to rival Shakespeare for meaningful work. First, I want to do an old prediction of mine. I predicted last year, I came here, and thanks for bringing me back. Not everybody gets a second, there's not always a sequel. J-Lark, I said last year, would drop in midsummer, mark the date. And it dropped, and it shaped the narrative, the entire narrative of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And this year, both parties, bipartisan support for the J-Lark recommendations, and we got a better budget than we've had in some time. Not a perfect budget, but a better budget. 3% raises for teacher, it's not enough, but it's still the right direction. At-risk add-on, so if you have at-risk kids, that money now goes under standards of quality. You may not know any of this because you're running schools, but it's part of the state financing structure. When that money goes under standards of quality, it now means the locality must do the match. That's a big frigging deal. Before, localities and many in Virginia turned their backs on kids in the past. And we're still in a commonwealth that a generation ago turned its back, the state of massive resistance to public education, integrated public education, and those legacies are still with us. But at-risk add-on in the SOQ, now localities have to pony up. If they're not, the state has new language threatening them with budget dollars. So that is a major move. Anyway, I had to say that about the old prediction. All right, new predictions. I know this is shocking news for you that teachers are going to feel a little overwhelmed next year if they're not already. New English language arts standards, new math standards, and a new way to judge schools. That's the cherry on top. What's the solution? right? What's the response? How can you address it? I got to be honest, we're talking school plans. The number one, and I know this is middle and high, but I'm just going to say the number one thing to be doing right now in schools is creating a climate where kids are happy, but also we need to teach kids to read. The Virginia Literacy Act passed 99-0. Think about how many things have passed 99-0. Elementary, it's starting first, but folks, middle school is next year. Don't wait till next year. Start it now. And high school, you need to begin working more with teachers to have them understand the science of reading, even as high school teachers. If you can't read, even in the digital world, right? If you can't read the tweet, you're going to be out of luck, right? We need kids to be able to read. Reading is going to be the focus next year. In the middle and high, I know you can still work with math, but math teachers are pretty good, new math standards. I'm not as worried about that, but you've got to be embedding more about reading with teachers. As far as the scorecard, tell teachers the scorecard has continued to change every generation. They move the goalpost with every administration. Go back and do what you know is right in the classroom. Love kids and love what you teach. And be sure you all as administrators are in classrooms. I said this last year before. 25 years ago, Public Agenda did this study with teachers. 2 out of 3 teachers said somebody they know was just going through the motions. We can't have teachers just going through the motions in classrooms. They have to love kids, number one, and they have to love what they're doing and be scholars in what they're doing. And if they don't have those two things, they need to be out of your classroom. I'm going to make a prediction and how to solve it. I do agree with Andy that the choice movement isn't going to go away. However, what we need to do is talk about, parents want choice, but they want informed choice. And informed choice must take the context of being within public ed. We need to continue to have choices and innovation within the context of public schools. What we don't need is to take public money and give a windfall to folks with no accountability. All we're spending time doing right now at the state level is talking about an accountability system, but the critics of that system would say, take all this money, give it to people with no accountability on how kids do. Folks, I deal now with other states where full voucher, full choice systems have gone in. 90% in Arizona, they have universal vouchers. 90% of the money goes to people who were never in public school to begin with. They made their choice a long time ago. It is a windfall for folks who already want the government to pay for their private school education, with all due respect. No accountability whatsoever. Frankly, folks want a lot of things, but they need to be informed in the choice. And one of the things, too, that I think is important to know about this, we need to go all the way back to the beginning. Public education isn't some latest fad. It isn't woke. Public education is the founder's vision. Thomas Jefferson was homeschooled, and you know what he figured out right at the beginning? We need public education. He wrote the Virginia General Assembly. We will not keep our democracy without an educated citizenry, and we need public education. You know what they said, Virginia said? I know you'll be shocked. Jefferson, we can't afford that right now. This was as a young man. Then he writes again with 5 to 6 years left in his life. We need a K-12 system. You know what the General Assembly said? We don't have the money. Then, at the very end, you know what he pitched? We need a public post-secondary college system. You know what that was called? UVA. And he had to beg and borrow to do that. And by the way, just while we're on Jefferson, because he knew a strong democracy required public education. You know the other thing? You know why UVA took a while to get going? Because he wanted at the center of UVA the rotunda, based on the Roman concept of reason. He didn't want a church. Most in America universities, Duke, Harvard, William and Mary, were centered around a church. Jefferson wanted centered around reason. Jefferson believed in Judeo-Christic principles, but he didn't want it as part of government. People paid taxes in Virginia to the Episcopal Church. The worst thing he thought for government was to have church and government combined. So public education is the founder's vision. It's not some wacky thing that we need to get rid of, and it's not a political litmus test. It is the founder's litmus test for democracy, and we need to keep public education front and center. When people understand that choice, do you want to keep your democracy or not, they'll have a different opinion about some of these choice ideas that are out there. But we've got to tell the history and the truth. Sorry, but I feel pretty passionate about that, if you didn't realize. Something Mark said was just brilliant, and he is brilliant. I've heard him speak before. Testing, the test scores are down. AI is the beginning of the death of standardized testing. I'm making that prediction right now. Quote me. AI is the beginning. The smartphone was like the entry blow. AI, standardized testing is over. We watched a debate last night. Did Biden and Trump sit and do a standardized test for 90 minutes, hit the bell, and then look to see who got the most answers right? Could have been. Mark says it would have been more enjoyable to have a standardized test, just watching two people grimace on the questions. Actually, the Board of Ed is considering a citizenship test for our kids to take in high school. I think it should start with our elected leaders, and let's see how well they can answer those tests before we're asking kids to do it. AI is going to end standardized testing as we know it. We still need some tests for basic math and literacy. And so don't get me wrong. The Virginia Literacy Act, we need fundamental understanding of literacy. I already said that earlier. So we need tests for the floor. But the ceiling is not through standardized testing. To assess the ceiling of kids, it is performance assessments. The future is performance assessments. The future is what questions can kids ask. You know what you can make hundreds of thousands of dollars doing now? Being a prompt engineer for these AI companies. What to ask. Have you started? I've started a little bit. I know I need to do more. Like if you ask a dumb question, you get a dumb answer out of AI. Sometimes, truthfully, still with some AI, you ask a smart question and you still get a dumb answer. One thing that's fun to do for yourselves, you all are in public official things, ask AI about you. Tell me about me. Ask AI to tell your story and then go, wait, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. Who said that? The bottom line, though, is it's performance skills, it's life and career-ready skills. That's what parents want. No one runs around now 10 and 20, 30 years later with their standardized test score. Do you know what your SATs are? I'm kind of a geek, and I do, and they weren't really as good as I would have liked. And guess what? Nobody ever asked me. Never. Never. AI is my prediction is that, and so continue to work on those performance assessments, those life skills. Give kids the chance to think, speak, listen, talk, all of those clubs and activities. Have a club and activity period. Thomas Jefferson, I think Andy or Mark mentioned, Thomas Jefferson had a period and made every kid join a club and then had a period every day. So it wasn't just the after-school kids who could do it. That's part of the American democracy. The skill set you need is how to deal with people. The fundamental thing for success in life is how your people skills. You need IQ, but without EQ, you are lost. Teach EQ in schools and teach the skills through performance assessments. Tests will take care of themselves if you target those kids who need, remember, if the kid's above the proficiency level, keeping on with those performance assessments. Kids that are behind will need some intensive foundational work, and don't leave those kids out at the high school and middle school level. One of my other predictions, it's going to be harder and harder to find traditional teachers. It already is. But here's a solution. First, we just got VASS, and I think VASSP supported, and we got the VEA to support. I know they're not here today. Effective July 1, a local license. You guys can hire, effective July 1, Anybody with a bachelor's degree, doesn't matter subject, with a bachelor's degree can come in for 1 year and teach in your school in any teaching position except special ed. For 1 year. You cannot pass that person on to another school division, but you can hire them in your school for 1 year, then get them on a provisional path. We're hoping to make it renewable. The governor signed it. We got support in the General Assembly. It took a lot of work. We have people with gifts out in this country, in this society, in our own community who would want to teach. And some of our critics, by the way, we need to get them in who are talented teachers to see what it is. Most people are back in the haze of their own childhood to determine whether schools, what they are and should be. They don't have a clue for today because they're not in there. We've got talent on the outside we need to bring in, and the traditional ways of licensing teacher. Our licensure program is broken. We need to reform it, and we need non-traditional people and local licensed people. You can hire anyone with a bachelor's. There's kids who are undecided senior year. They're lost, who would be great as teachers. Go get them this year and put them in, and you get a year. If you don't like it, you don't have to hire them back. In fact, you can't right now unless they get provisionally tracked. So we need to take this whole group of people who've never thought about teaching to have a second look. By the way, there's something called I Teach Too. I love our colleges and universities, but the traditional way of teaching kids, oh my God, they've got to change or we got to go with the alternate paths. Some states, they're letting school districts do the certification of teachers. I don't know if you want that. It's one more thing, but I'm just saying, we know better, you know better in the school and classroom who can and can't make it and what it takes. And that's just the truth. Higher ed has got to adjust or that business is going to be taken away from them. And some states are already doing it. And is that it? Okay, I think I'll finish with just saying, have hope. Keep hope alive. I know it was a slogan a long time ago by somebody else. Attribution, Jesse Jackson. But it's true. You're still in the most meaningful thing. American democracy needs you. The kids need you. Don't go anywhere. AI isn't going to replace teachers. And it's great to see you. I hope to see you again soon. Thanks.
Hi. Hello. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Excited to be here with you all today. As Randy had introduced, I am currently a 9th grade parent and a 12th grade parent. So I'm solidly entering the high school years here. And I've been involved in PTA for the better part of a decade. And so I love having a great bingo night that spills out into the hallways where you start to wonder if you have enough seats and you're pulling them in from other places, just as much as I love going down to the General Assembly and talking about the challenges that face our schools and how we work together and collaborate to support and uplift our communities. And so I want to start by actually thanking all of you for the collaboration and workspace that you bring within your PTAs. I know many of you sitting here are actually PTA members, and you serve on the executive board of your local PTA, and probably as parents, you're also part of the PTAs within your school communities. And so I just wanted to start by saying thank you, because that collaboration space that we create together as parents and administrators is so critically important. One of the first things that we tell our PTA leaders when we sit down with them for our President's 101 is to reach out to their principals. Make sure that you're forming those partnerships and asking what their goals are for the coming school year. And so I think, when we talk about the challenges and predictions, I think there's just one massive challenge that's happening, which is this cascade of change that we have coming into this current school year. We have changes to the accreditation standards. We have new labels that we're going to put onto schools. We've changed the curriculum. And then we have this persistent lack of underfunding, and to the point where you can't even say that it's a crisis at this point because it's a state of constant change, right? We know that we have these students that are high-risk learners that need additional support, and there's, our high poverty students, our English language learners, our special education learners, and we've made some significant progress together in that advocacy space over the past year and bringing in some of the largest investments for our English language learners and our students living in poverty. But I want to encourage you to work with your PTAs and work with your parents, to invite them into the buildings. I think the most important way to address these challenges and to lift up those achievement gaps is to invite the parents in the building. And I'll just give a brief example. At my my daughter just finished middle school, right? So we came into the last week of the school year, and I was like, this is great. I got invited to come into German class and have a little coffee klatsch and practice my rusty German with them. They invited me into English class, and I got to hear presentations. I came over to the school for like 5-6 times in the course of 1 week. I hadn't been invited over to the building the whole school year to be actually engaged in some kind of academic achievement. And so I want to encourage you throughout the school year, don't save those things for the end of the school year, but get down into the weeds with your parents and actually talk with them about the challenges that you're facing, the things that you're thinking about as a principal, that you're striving for in that academic achievement space. Don't be afraid to say out loud, we're really struggling with our English language learners. It would be exciting if we could have some support in that space. Reach out and ask your PTA leaders to get involved in that space with you. Maybe create a morning coffee hour where you invite your English language learner families in and invite your PTA leaders in and have them learn Spanish together and have them learn English with each other. Create those opportunities where you've invited them into the building. I want to encourage you to encourage your families to actually come to whether it's your PTA or your PTO meeting and say some of the things that you're going to talk about. Talk about the actual academic achievement goals that you have. Don't just let yourself get into the space of talking about how to run bingo night. And mind you, I love a ferocious bingo night, but also spend some time talking about the ways that you're going to lift up and improve academic achievement and how parents can get involved in that space. I think the most important part of that is deep communication. As we came through the past couple of years, there was so much, perception of chaos in the public education space and this kind of fear of communication where, our parents against teachers or teachers against parents. But I think change and frankly, the use of schools to drive political votes is a constant in the space of education. That has always been the case, that you see radical change happening in our education system. And I actually think it's a positive thing, right? Because when you have discourse and dialogue, it leads you to continuously improve and change things. So don't be afraid of the debate and of the challenge. Your parents are, in the PTA space, we seek nonpartisanship, right? We seek to come to the middle and lead from the middle, and it's okay to have those debates and those dialogues. And I think that the more we do active and proactive communication, it helps to dispel some of that misinformation and disinformation that we hear out in the public, right? It's very easy to say, oh, schools aren't serving our needs. But our parents that are in the building and our students that are in the building know that that's absolutely not true. And they're here to be your cheerleaders and to work with you and to collaborate with you. And they are actually also free labor, honestly, right? We have 6,000 locally elected parent volunteers across the Commonwealth, 130,000 members. They are excited to come in and help you with whatever you need help and support with. So I would encourage you to use them as a resource. And, in that funding space as well, obviously we're excited to come and help you raise some money for things that might be successful. But also there's a deep space there to collaborate in that advocacy space. So if there's something that you wish was happening in your building, take some time to educate your parents about it. Let them know what would be great if they were down talking to the school board about it. Let them know, where there's gaps that would be great if they came down to the General Assembly and participated in that work. I know lots of you probably get my newsletters, and so you'll see me encouraging people repetitively to go ahead and engage in that work. I think in our local buildings, we get so entrenched in this is just my single space, and I'm just creating culture and school spirit here that sometimes we lose focus on that greater impact that sharing those stories that come from our individual buildings use to drive important change that we need at the state and the federal level in terms of bringing in that funding. And unless you're talking about those challenges in your building, you're not equipping your parents with those stories that they need to carry with them and ask for that additional funding to come into your buildings. In terms of challenges, I just want to briefly mention cell phones. We've had a lot of conversation over the last couple of years about cell phone use in the school buildings. Neither of my kids for the past year have been allowed to have their cell phones in the classroom. In my daughter's school, they put it into the locker, and my son's in high school, and his approach to it is a little different. He's like, well, they're going to make me put away my cell phone, but I've still got my watch. Right? And he's like, I've still got my laptop that's issued by the school, and so I can still sit here and chat with people if I wanted to, even though they made me tuck my cell phone away. And so I think, it's okay. Parents adapt and adjust to those types of things. It's okay to say we're not going to have cell phones in the classroom. Please put them into your backpack. I think there starts to become an anxiety space when you take this expensive piece of equipment and make them tuck it in the front of the classroom. but certainly they can tuck it into their backpack and be just fine throughout the day using their other technology pieces that they have with them. But I think we're going to see a lot of conversation around that and moving to that space of helping our kids move off of that kind of addiction, that reliance on constant information. And then in the space of, we've got a lot of change happening in the literacy space. I actually think that there's still change to happen in the math space. I don't think that, I know we just had new math curriculum come out, but I think that there's an opportunity there to continue to shift towards more applied learning. Like, it's one thing to say, oh, we have, geometry class, but it's an entirely different thing if we were going to start talking about true, genuine classes like, here's Engineering 101. And in Engineering 101, we're going to learn about this math skill and about this applied, life skill. So I think there's still opportunity there to talk about how we really drive math instruction and to correlate it and tie it to really practical hands-on applications. We do that a lot of times with our gifted learners where we give them those pathways for applied learning, but we don't do it as much with our struggling learners. I think it's incredibly important that we look for those opportunities. If you need to, bring your parents into the building. Have them help you set up some opportunities for some applied learning where they can, do some actual projects with the kids and help them, build a small house or, do Finance 101. Ask your parents who's involved in the finance industry. Have them come in and talk about how some of those math skills apply. So I think there's opportunity there to really go after some applied learning, and continue to drive that conversation. And so I'll leave it at that and for questions.
Let me just first off by starting off with, going into the school year, it seems pretty overwhelming with a lot of things between standards, whether staffing is where it needs to be at this point, because some positions are still open. I'd like to kind of start with Tim, if you don't mind, here with this question, work our way down here. But just this broad question, how can principals maybe support their staff with some changes that are coming forward?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think that what we do is we try to just break it down in palatable chunks for our staff and kind of take them through step by step to get through, especially when you have curriculum changes. Provide that necessary exposure to the curriculum prior to the school year, have them work together in teams because, again, when they're isolated, and teaching can be isolated, although not as much as when I first started, certainly, but when they work together in their collaborative teams to work through those changes, it's much more digestible for them to handle it. And I think always having that attitude that mistakes are okay and that we're not going to be perfect the first time rolling out, and making sure, because your top teachers put that pressure on themselves already. They expect themselves to be perfect. And so it's really kind of talking them through that it's okay to learn through this, make mistakes. We're going to learn and grow with that. So that's really how we deal with the curriculum changes, the staffing changes or staffing shortages that you may have. That's a whole nother kind of topic. But, there are ways, certainly at the high school level and middle school level, to deal with that with people teaching extra sections, for compensation and spreading the wealth out, so to speak, for that extra demand. The problem with that, of course, is that like a lot of things, that sounds great. Sometimes teachers are excited to have the extra compensation to teach an extra section, but it wears them down. And it sounds really attractive at the beginning because of the money maybe, but then by mid-year they're burnt out. Or certainly if they do it year over year over year, it becomes too much for them and pulls away from their overall quality.
Mark, I had a question about trust here, but let me skip over to Scott here to answer the same question. Where do principals start with just all this information that's coming in?
Okay. Open positions this year, right? You have vacancies this year, starting July 1. You can put someone on a local license with a bachelor's degree for any position except special ed. Any position. You need to take advantage. Up to 5% of your division's workforce can be under this local license. There'll be some specific VDOE information, I think, coming out next week to superintendents in more detail. But that is the new law. These people that you've been hiring for long-term subs, they can't get benefits, they're on a lower salary scale, you can make them full-time teaching positions. Now, give them support, give them mentoring, but you can hire anyone with a bachelor's degree anywhere from Virginia or anywhere in the country for any one of your spots. Now, I'm not saying that's a cure-all for everything, but that is another tool you didn't have before, and you should absolutely use it to bring some people in for positions that you couldn't have before. So that's number one. The other one, I know you all know this, but it just goes without saying, professional development is still one of the difference makers between great schools and schools that are just sort of so-so. You all need to work with your amazing directors of student services or guidance directors. Embed as much professional development or PLC time into your master schedule for teachers to meet by departments, or at least within subgroups of the departments, and then go and see what they're doing during their PLC meetings, and then see if that's reflected in what's actually teaching. So PD matters. Have a local school PD plan. I'm sure your division has stuff too. And continue to create a learning environment in your school to help teachers. If they're isolated, they're going to get stuck. They need to be looped in with other colleagues and with you to help them through things they're struggling. That and the local license. PD and local license are two tools. Use them this coming year. That's my 2 cents for that.
Thank you. Andy, I want to ask you a question which is kind of along the lines of that. We were talking about just new standards that are going to be coming, some of the changes that the Board of Education is now. Can you kind of just give principals a refresher of why some of these changes were made to the standards?
Well, yeah, thanks. I mean, look, the standards, we have to review them every 7 years. It's actually a fantastic action forcing mechanism because it just means they come up on a cycle, and that's good, and we review them and we update them. I would urge you to actually read them. People, there's always a lot of rhetoric when people actually dig into them, particularly our history and social science standards now are world-class relative to other states in their treatment of a number of issues. They're really exciting. The coverage has not been terrific. As we tell students, go read the primary document. I think the ELA ones are great. There's some disagreements on certain aspects of those. We just did computer science. So those are just going to continue to happen on a cycle. I do want to make a comment, though, on the other. Look, we treat in this field time as a constant. Time has got to be a variable. And if we're going to do VLA and we're going to get serious about teaching reading, we're going to have to give high-quality professional development to teachers. That's going to take time. It's going to take money. And it's going to take some flexibility. And, right now you're seeing places be like, well, we want to teach reading, but to do that, we're going to have kids out of school a couple afternoons, here and there so we can do that. You need to step back and open the aperture. How does that message land with parents, right? Not the activist involved parents, but the average parent is like, wait a minute, you're telling me my kid's not going to school because you need to learn how to teach reading? What do you do all day normally? Like, we need to be much more of a can-do, and that's going to require, again, more money, and there's a role for that. It's going to require more time. It's going to require teachers working differently and being paid differently, which is good and can help with this issue of attracting teachers and so forth. But we cannot continue to have this scarcity sort of idea where we treat all these things as fixed. We have to start treating these things as variable, or we can come back and talk about the choice stuff and sort of how that goes. I agree with Scott in part and disagree in part, but that is just going to continue to happen if we are not out there with a very can-do attitude in meeting parents where they are and with their basic and frankly understandable expectations for what it is that we do. So yeah, there's a lot coming down the pike, and we're going to have to rise to the occasion. I have full confidence that we can rise to the occasion, and I think we spend a lot of time. If you follow the board meetings, you've seen this. We spend a disproportionate amount of time talking about what people can't do rather than what we can do. And I think it's that can-do ethos and confidence in the people like you in this room and the educators around the state that are going to get us where we need to go. So it's an ambitious agenda, but I think it's certainly an attainable one.
This next question is for Mark and Jenna. I'll start with Mark first here with this question, but it talks about just the trust you were speaking about here. Is it too late to gain that trust from parents and community groups when we're at work? Yeah. Is there?
No, it's not too late. It is. my mother said it to me, trust is the easiest thing to break and the hardest thing to build. And we did have trust in our educational systems. And like I said, 9/11 became that triggering event, the cause of that. But we can rebuild trust. Right now, it doesn't feel like it. I've said to people, if you really want to understand politics in our nation, you don't need to go to Washington, D.C., you don't need to go to your state house, just go to your local school board meeting. And what you're going to hear there is really a lack of trust. Lack of trust that just doesn't exist between community and the schools. It's within the schools, within the communities, and there's a variety of mechanisms. As I said earlier, everything now is right or wrong. That's not the world we live in. People want to shape that. You listen to television, you look at certain stations, they got their version of the truth. And as educational leaders, you brought up a name of the past. I did know Bud Spillane. Bud's from Massachusetts. But as educational leaders, we have to help our communities and our schools focus on why they're there. Not who's right and who's wrong. Like our accountability systems, I tell policymakers, build your accountability system from the individual student to the parent to the teacher out. What would it look like? We build accountability systems for the legislator, for the policymaker, for the business community, for the overall communities. And then the afterthought are parents, teachers, and kids. Because if you really built it for kids, parents, and teachers, they'd know tomorrow what happened yesterday. But when they take an exam and have to wait months to understand that, you leave parents, teachers, and kids with no recourse, no ability to react, no ability to grow. So it's some of the behaviors we're doing right now that are inflaming a lack of trust. School leaders, you're the connector. You're the connector between school and home. You're the connector between school and community. You're a connector between all your stakeholder groups. Help your communities rebuild trust by focusing on the main thing.
And just to repeat the question, we're talking about regaining trust with parents and community members. Jenna, would like to.
Hello. So I don't actually think you ever lost trust. I think that's a political talking point, honestly. And I think that the discord that we see, and I'll just say I'm in Loudoun County. You know, I enjoy rigorous debate. Parents in Loudoun engage in rigorous debate, and sometimes it is really rowdy. But a lot of what you see at the school board meetings are political activists. They're not your casual parent that's in your school building. They're not your classic, PTA, PTO leaders that are interested in coming in and to collaborate with the building. So I don't think there was actually a lack or loss of trust. I think that the parents that have kids in the building have been there standing beside you and looking to cheerlead with you and looking to collaborate with you the entire time. And I think there's others that don't have kids in the building that have realized, as they have throughout history, whether you're looking at the changes that came through massive resistance or Brown versus Board of Education, or even if we went back to 1905 and we talked about, our shared history here on the wings of educational change that swept through Virginia that formed the junior leagues, which is now the Student Council Association, which used to be part of the Virginia PTA until the 1970s, right? We have that shared advocacy space that dates back 120 years. There's always been discord in the education space because it's so deeply personal to families, right? You're talking about our babies, you're talking about our kids, and frankly, you're talking about our communities. You're talking about the success and vitality of what is the heartbeat of my community. A lot of times, as you come into that parent space, the first space you come into is that elementary school, and you have that sense of community. It's the heartbeat of what brings you in and makes you a center of that community and carries you through those relationships that you build, carry your kids through, honestly, throughout, all the way up through the high school space. And I think, there is for sure frustration in the parent space. And I'll just mention, if you're going to talk about school calendars, I think this is when you'll easily have every parent, regardless of how much they may support the school system, come out with a degree of frustration. Like there is distinct frustration happening right now around the rollout of the Literacy Act and the subsequent, the slow cascade that we've had in training that's now causing schools to be closed. And I think parents are in two camps there. in one camp, they're saying, like, I want my teachers to be trained to be the best of the best because I want my kids to get the best of the best. So yes, train them up, take some time, make sure that they know exactly how to do this so that my kids can get the best instruction. But then when you start saying, now you also have to take off work because we're going to close school for 4 additional days because we're going to do this additional training, I think that's where the rub starts to become. And so I think we need to look for those pathways where, and again, this comes to, wrapping your arms around the parent community in terms of communication. Don't just send out your standard newsletter with your basic information that's the exact same newsletter that I got last week is the same newsletter that I got this week. Go ahead and take a few minutes at the top and say, these are the things I'm thinking about this week. Or even, and I'll just, use a different example off in this trust space, right? We've had a lot of conversation over the past year really focused around fentanyl and around vaping, right? It is a problem in our communities, and not outwardly saying that to the parents and saying, hey, guess what? There is a vaping problem happening in the bathroom. Talk to your kids about it. Like, that is just such a simple statement and so powerful and important. So if you're talking about putting sensors into the school bathroom to detect vaping, then actually saying to the parents, let's have a little class. I'm going to bring the, sheriff's department over. I'm going to show you what the vapes look like, talk about how they work, talk about how you can have this conversation. I think it's really important that we continue to create those opportunities to educate our parents and bring them into that circle of trust. But I don't think that the trust was ever lost. I think it's a handy political lever.
Andy, you want to follow up?
Yeah, I don't entirely disagree. I mean, if you look, public schools are a high trust institution. I agree with Mark. We're becoming a low trust society for a bunch of reasons. You see that in our politics or institutions. Certain institutions that hasn't hit as hard in the public schools are one of them. So I think I don't completely agree with the premise of the question, but we have to earn that trust. And because that trust is high, when it's violated, it hits harder. So when parents, I think that's one of the reasons COVID, people felt very let down with the response and what the work kids were getting at home and how divisions were responding, how long schools stay closed. So when you have trust, when it's broken, it hits harder than when you don't. And so we feel it more acutely when parents find out there's stuff happening in schools that they weren't aware of. That hits harder because they thought that there was trust. And on the macro level, we're dealing with this right now about trying to level with people on what's going on with student achievement. That we have, we're a Commonwealth with, 6 in 10 African-American kids are below basic at 8th grade on the NAEP, which is below basic is not like, is the bar high enough? Below basic means like functionally unprepared for opportunity of any kind. That's true of half of low-income kids in the state. It's true of half of Hispanic kids. We don't talk about that, right? You will search in vain for the press release about that. And we're trying to start, we tell people 9 out of 10 schools are doing great. So when they start to learn these things, the trust, it hits harder. And so as a community, we have to manage like being transparent, open about what's going on, maintaining trust, and also improving. That's a tall order. It's a tall order if you're a building leader. It's a tall order if you're a state leader. But again, as I said, I'm fundamentally optimistic that we can do it. But I think, and because again, we are coming from a place of trust. But because of that, when trust is broken, it will hit us much more, and we need to be aware of that.
Thank you. I want to go ahead and turn it over to some of our viewers here with our first question here. So,
well, good morning, everybody. I'm riveted. I'll be honest with you. Thank you, first of all, so much. I love the conversation. I talked to you, Andy, a little bit before this starting. I love the power of conversation. I love the different viewpoints, the different perspectives, and I think having great conversation leads to progress, and we're seeing a little bit of that on this podium. I'm going to come around with a mic. If you have a question, raise your hand. I'm going to turn it over to Mike Kelly, our VASS president, who's going to ask the first question, and I'm going to come around and just see who's interested in giving the next one.
Thanks, Sean. Wow, what a great panel, and what a diverse panel, too. I appreciate that. Many things that I heard that I have tons of questions on, but one that came to mind when Andy started speaking about a declining enrollment, and then I think about my colleague Tim on the podium with a significant increase in the Hispanic population and the need for ESL teachers. Virginia Beach, I'm at a comprehensive high school with about 1,700 students. I have one ESL teacher. My friend Sean, who's walking around, has 2,200 kids and 31 ESL teachers. So there's a big disparity, and I would like to hear from either Tim or Andy or anyone from the panel, what do you see are the changes in policy that we're going to be needing to make in terms of more than just hiring more ESL teachers? What are we going to have to do to meet this growing population that's dire need for our support in education?
Well, I'll take a quick stab at that. From my viewpoint, I think the growth I've had is that English language learners don't fit one mold. Like, we think English language learners, and immediately a lot of people are like Spanish speakers. Well, we've had a massive influx of Middle Eastern students, and even sometimes I think we're guilty of looping or grouping all Hispanic kids all together, but they come from very different cultures, very different backgrounds, very different countries and belief systems. And that's true of Middle Eastern, it's true of all of our English language learners. And I think that's the next big growth area, is as we're diagnosing how to attack chronic absenteeism, right? Or the English language student's family who goes back to their home country for a month, and we're like, no, don't do, please. And we're diagnosing how to best deal with that, and how we're dealing with cultural norms within families about the value of community college or four-year college versus going to work immediately to help support the family. I think really having more growth and professional development and understanding that all these kids don't fit, all these families and kids don't fit one mold. There's not going to be one solution for that. I think that's probably our next big challenge and the growth that we need in that area.
The big policy thing we're doing, I mean, look, the trajectory on this is amazing. The first time I was on the board, I remember meeting with a superintendent who told me they didn't have English language learners in their community, and I knew there was a migrant camp less than a mile from where we were having that conversation, right? But it was just those kids were just shunted aside. I was a long-term sub before we had this new policy. I could have been a full-time teacher. I was a long-term sub teaching ESL, and people were still trying to get their hands around it and the diversity. And then we saw the really rapid growth in a lot of our communities. And so the conversations we're having now are great. They're much more inclusive. How do we serve those kids? But we have a long way to go. Just last week at the board meeting, we had a debate, and here's so you're asking, what are we going to do? We kept 35,000 kids out of our school system. These are overwhelmingly non-white kids, kept out of our accountability system because they're English language learners. And we are making a step in our new accountability system to bring them in. That's how we fundamentally address this. We make sure that all kids are included. What's happening to all kids is measured and accounted for. And there has been a lot of attention on that, surprisingly. I think, you would think 35,000 kids, that would, I don't want to be like guest editor, but that seems like news to me. And it got almost no attention, but that's the kind of slow progress. And so we need to do the things, I completely agree with Tim, and then we need to do the things in policy at the state level to make sure that we're actually accounting for and we're considering these kids and that we have high expectations for them and their outcomes, and we're not sort of, minimizing what happens to them or putting them into educational cul-de-sacs.
All right. Nathaniel, there's a question here in the very back.
Good morning. My name is Mrs. Alma Waller. I'm the principal at Martinsville Middle School, and I have a question in regards to the local licensing. How will that impact the new accreditation rating, which puts more emphasis on having qualified licensed teachers? So if we were to hire teachers and give them this employees and give them the local license, making them a teacher, then how will that affect the school's accreditation rating? Will we still get a hit saying they're not highly qualified with an actual teaching license? Let's say a big division. We're a small division. I only have about 400 students. So if I was to hire 5 teachers and give them this local license after Monday, next year with a new accreditation rating, that's counting, the state is looking at how many teachers do you have that's qualified with an actual license that's going to impact your rating for your school. How will this local license, where will that fit? Will they count as someone without a license, or will they count with someone as a license, or have y'all not figured that part out yet?
I think we need to see what the detail is. Right now, you're not getting credit for it anyway because they're unlicensed. So it should, I'm hopeful that VDOE will count that as a licensed teacher. It says local license. So to me, it should count. And if we get information in the next week or two that it's not, I certainly would love to work with Randy and we can have a conversation with the state superintendent. But I'm very hopeful that this is a license issued like any other license in Virginia. It's only for 1 year. That person cannot leave Martinsville School District to go somewhere else. Only your division. What we want to do in the next General Assembly is make it renewable. Right now it's a 1 year non-renewable, and then they would have to get on track to be provisional, which means taking a bunch of classes. Some people financially can't. But as we understand it, it will be an official license like any other. We used to have it 15 years ago, it was taken away. And so we put this back in as a tool, especially given the teacher shortage. So I'm glad there's already interest about doing it, and we'll follow up to be sure that it won't be a hit on your, I think it's your IPL or whatever that report is about highly qualified teachers in schools.
All right, here, the next question's over from here.
Hi, I'm Brian Ward, and I'm an assistant principal at Pulaski County High School. You guys talked about teacher shortage. I also have concerns about administrators being available. On any given day, I'll have young teachers who should be headed towards leadership say they don't want my job. I can go to the office and get a phone call, and people will tell me that they're going to have me fired. I know principals, as soon as they take a job, their career the clock may be starting on the end of their career. They're asked to do more and more things, and your face is going to be on Instagram if there's a fight, or people on Facebook are going to attack you when their daughter doesn't wear something appropriate to school. What can we do to try to make sure that we have folks who want to be part of that leadership program when what they see is not something that they want to put themselves through?
Yeah, I'll just jump in here. I think that's a real challenge, right? As you were describing all of that, I was smiling at my group of assistant principals over here because we're like reliving things. And this year I've had every email I sent for 1 month FOIA'd by a parent, right? So, I mean, it's intimidating. And I think that I'm going to go back to what Scott said earlier. It's still a great job. Like, I've done it for 20 years. And although I'm tired and I need some therapy sessions and I have to vent, I love what I do every day, right? I mean, maybe on Friday night when it's 10 p.m. and the kid still hasn't been picked up from the football game, I'm like, what am I doing with my life? But the reality is, when I check myself and I've had time to like sleep, I'm like, I love my job. And I really feel like I was called to do it, and I'm good at it. And I felt like I've made a real difference in kids' lives and teachers' lives. And so I think it's probably, we need to advocate, as I said, through VASSP, through other ways, to our local school boards, about the challenges of our jobs, right? I mean, the rigors that are being placed upon us. I was talking earlier, like, I feel like summer break doesn't even happen anymore. Now my school division, like, I got to go to Title IX training. I got to go to sexual harassment training. I mean, I got like 12 trainings to complete in July, right? So there's no time to like decompress and have a visionary time where you can like plan for things. And so that's real. But I think part of it is we have to check ourselves and maybe have a little less therapy sessions with teachers so they don't see that raw side of us, that maybe our spouses do or maybe our assistant principals do. But we've got to advocate that it's still a great job and we make a difference and we're changing people's lives, So I think we've got to advocate for our own profession to regenerate the next generation of administrators.
And I respect your views on trust, and I wasn't referencing rigorous debate or discourse in a public setting like a board meeting. But I was referencing a sense of what both of these gentlemen just shared. When you have your emails for the last month being requested, when you have things being put on Instagram or being called that your job is going to be taken from you. That's evidence of a lack of trust. That's what I mean, what you're living every day. In the underserved community, when they are afraid to walk into the schools because they don't trust the schools, because they see the schools not serving the needs of their individual students, there is an absence of trust. And it's why we have to move your roles from being leaders in a community to being leaders of a community and rebuild that trust. It's a hard pathway forward, folks. But your job is noble. Your job is incredibly important. And your job is the essence of what will make us successful and prevail in the future. But it begins with rebuilding trust. It's not a lack of trust in you as an individual person. It's a lack of trust of the system.
We're going to stay on this side of the room.
Hi, my name is Ashley Fayborg. I'm the principal at Nye River Middle School. I'm also working on my dissertation studying ethical leadership and accountability. So that is what my question is about. As we're moving into value-added and growth models and really looking at the equity for how we're measuring our students, what do you predict will be some future ethical challenges that leaders will face as we consider school accreditation and accountability?
It's a great question. I did my dissertation on leader integrity, and leader integrity is something that is not a constant. It's something that you have to demonstrate every moment of every day. And leader integrity has three parts to it. One is that you act in accordance with your own beliefs. Two, you act in accordance with the mission and values of the institution you're leading. And three, you act in accordance with the interests of the individual and, not or, the interests and values of the institution. And so you can engage a parent and do it with integrity and do it with ethics in one moment, and then walk down the hall and say to a student something that lacks integrity in the way that you just undress that student, for instance, or judge that student. And so it is the essence of effective leadership, is to be able to balance the notion of integrity in every engagement, but to build on these ethics. As we have declining enrollments and we have declining resources, we have competing resources, which puts us into addressing ethical dilemmas. And a dilemma is something that there is no absolute right answer or absolute wrong answer. You have competing solutions that you actually have to address both. And so it's finding that balance as leaders. One of the things that's happened in our environments, and I don't want to make this a political conversation, but it's an illustration of it. We have legislators, both state and federal, who go to the legislature and forget their primary job is to govern. They're still politicking. They're not governing. And what that's an example of is a lack of ethics in carrying out their responsibility. You may be voted in by your constituents. I deal with this all the time in training school board members. Is you may have been voted in by your district, but once that you've been voted in, you now have a responsibility to every child in that district. You have a responsibility to every parent in that system or division in Virginia. You have responsibility to every teacher, not just those who voted for you. And it's a lack of ethics in helping people understand their role as leaders that has gotten us into many of these problems that we have today, and it comes back to trust. It's a hard question to answer. I want to read your dissertation. So when you do finish it, find me online. I'd love a link because I think you're doing really important work.
If I could just say on this, I don't know the latest stats. When I was in Lynchburg, 2012 to 2017, I read an article. 2 states, this is 2012 to 2017, 2 states below the Mason-Dixon line in the South, only 2 states, had the majority of public education kids that weren't poor or non-white, Maryland and Virginia. I believe actually in the last 5 to 10 years, public education in Virginia, I'd have to check, may have even crossed that threshold in Virginia that the majority of public education kids are non-white and free or reduced lunch. The ethical consideration of our time, are we going to treat those kids with the same dignity, the same respect, and provide the same funding and same supports as we did for the generation of kids before us? I think that is the number one issue. And I don't want to do politics either, but we need to look at where the old thing from Watergate was follow the money. Where's the money going and where is the money not going? One of the new things, and I appreciate Andy and I agree on some things. I think we need to have choice. I think it needs to be within public school context. 35,000 more kids are going to be under the new accountability system. Why? Because we gave kids 11 semesters before taking standardized tests. And the state board will vote next month to make it 3 semesters. You're here a year and a half and you're going to take those standardized tests. How are they going to do? Most research says it takes 3 to 5 years to get cognitive skills to pass content-specific tests. Are we going to provide more supports in Virginia for those schools? Mike, you said you're in Virginia Beach. You have same size school as Sean. You got 1 ESOL teacher, and Sean has 22 in Fairfax, 31. It's outrageous. Outrageous. If those were white, upper middle class kids, 1 teacher for them, 31 for another, there'd be a riot in Richmond. It is outrageous. And you need to go with Sean and Randy and all of you and go the disparity in funding and staffing for the kids. Do unto me how done to the least of us. Do unto me, right? We don't need the 10 commandments posted in schools like they're doing in Oklahoma. We need people to live by the Judeo-Christian values as they approach public education. That's what we need. That's the litmus test of our time. Will we keep the founders' vision for public education? And will we take care of these kids that are poor and many that are black and brown, and they deserve the same opportunities? And that's the future of our country, right, is a big mix. It's not going to be one dominated group, whether people like that or not. How do we bring everybody together? And we've got to build, public schools are the last place, it's the last convening place in this nation that brings people together. The last place. We've got to fight and defend it and bring people back into it and show it can work. We need to talk to folks with different views from us. We need parents to come in who are critics, meet them. I would talk after all these meetings. And I want to say something to someone else who said, I'm getting tired of it. I was in Lynchburg and then in Fairfax during COVID. I only had all those times, only 2 times that I felt personally attacked. Once in Lynchburg, once in Fairfax, and both after I took this job. Most people came up and said, thank you, Lord Jesus, I would never do what you are doing. Thank you for what you are doing. People still respect in this country, the large majority, what you all do. The great majority. The problem is we have media and algorithms and social media that let a few people with hate and negativity then dominate because people put eyeballs on it. We have got to reject that. And public education, you need to invite everybody into your school. Don't be afraid. Most people, when they see what you do, will support it. Will support it. There's a new book out called They Came for Our Schools. Going to win the Pulitzer Prize. That's a prediction. It talks about a school district in Texas, high performing. What happened and what they're doing really to rechange the narrative. They came for our schools. We need to defend our schools like we defend the Constitution of the United States. The equity question, the ethical question of our future, will we treat all of our kids of this generation the same we did the generations before with the support and resources they need to be successful.
Yeah, I want to take a stab at answering the question. It's absolutely a fantastic. I do a lot of these panels. That is a fantastic question. I hear what Scott's saying, but I would respectfully suggest there's a contradiction. You can't say we're going to keep kids out for 11 semesters, which, by the way, the federal government won't let us do because it's a civil rights issue, right? This is a unique Virginia thing that we keep asking for permission to do. The feds keep saying you can't do that because it's a civil rights issue. It's sort of an article of faith. You can't, on the one hand, say that and then say we need more money for teachers and so forth. We have to hold ourselves to a high bar for accountability and transparency and equity, and then demand the money. And I will speak, again, I'm not speaking for the board, I'm speaking for myself. I am frustrated. I think we are going to get ultimately to finance reform and a reform that has more equitable finance and money that follows kids more. It's a shame we can't do that in conjunction with the accountability system. We can't have the kind of grand bargain that you've seen in some other states. We're going to get there, but we can't get there if we keep, as a community, as an education community, not holding ourselves to a really high inclusive bar. And we can talk a lot about we have to defend public education from these people or these people. I would suggest sometimes the calls are coming from inside the house, and we need to be attentive to that. So to your question, I regret to tell you there is no way we can design an accountability system at the state there will not be some way to game it. There will not be ethical choices that people will have to make. And so we need ethical leaders. I thought Mark's framework was fantastic. So I think it's on us to try to make sure we're not introducing perverse incentives, that we're being attentive to that it's real, that we're being responsive and so forth as it moves forward. And then it's on leaders to realize we can either tell a good story, and so we can game things out at the local level to tell a good story, or we can tell an honest story, even when it's not sometimes a comfortable story. And so, for example, on this issue of achievement gaps and equity and inclusion of all kids, we have not told an honest story for a very long time. Like, that's on us to do and to level with people about where we are and then to do better. So I think that responsibility to address what you're talking about, it has to be shared. And building leaders are going to have to do their part and sometimes make some tough decisions and have to explain things to their communities that are uncomfortable and so forth. At the state level, we're going to have to continue to be responsive, learning to feedback, and also making sure, and this is what I think is the real promise of this system, that we're using it then to direct resources where they're needed. Right now, we return money to the federal government. We return $10 million a year in school improvement money we can't use because we can't direct it under our system. Like, this is going to allow us to direct our money better. Hopefully there will be new investments as well. And so all that will fit together, but it's going to take everybody. It's not a state thing. It's not just a building leader thing. It's going to take all of us. And your question and the framework that Mark laid out, I think, shows the complexity of it and what a change management challenge it's going to be. But as I said at the beginning, I think we can do it. I have extremely high expectations for what we're capable of.
All right, we're right here in the middle. Thank you. I'm Mike Pflugrath, principal, Osborne High School in Manassas City. This question is more about accreditation. I'm hearing a lot about trust and transparency throughout the board, and the accreditation system is like a moving target. So it moves and it changes, and we're often judged or evaluated based off that accreditation system. And sometimes it appears that the system changes depending on who's in office. In the spirit of trust and transparency, why wouldn't we use a third party or outside entity to conduct our accreditation of our schools? Why are we doing it within our own system? Could you help me understand that?
Well, I think I know a little bit about accreditation. Just a little. You're absolutely right. Accreditation, the way the state of Virginia is using the term, is actually not accreditation. Okay, accreditation is not specific to education. It's a professional process of peer review. And its benefit is that it's usually very stable, and it provides a very solid, transparent framework for institutional improvement over time. Whether that institution's a hospital, a school, could be a police academy, could be training lawyers. Accreditation actually began in this country in the late 1800s. Virginia's shift there, quite frankly, was somewhat surprising because Virginia and Sachs were hand in hand. Most of the early leaders of Southern Association of Colleges and Schools came from the state of Virginia. A lot of the leadership and structure of Sachs history, which was formed in 1895, came from educational leaders across the state of Virginia. It needs to return to that or stop using the term accreditation, because what you have is an accountability system, and you're using the term accreditation because that has power and meaning behind it. And as your divisions in schools have left accreditation from a third party like Sachs, it has insulated itself into just a state-recognized system. If a school is accredited by the state of Virginia, it is only recognized for that purpose in the state of Virginia. That's it. It doesn't transport. Why is that important, or is it unimportant? Well, let's say you have parents who are divorced, and one parent lives in the state of Georgia, the other parent lives in Fairfax County, and the child graduates and wants to go to Georgia Tech and got a high grade point average. Well, by the state of Georgia, that student is eligible for a Hope Scholarship based on their GPA, what they earned in high school, provided that high school is accredited by a regional agency. The state of Virginia is not a regional accrediting agency. There's only 6 regional accrediting agencies which were formed in the late 1800s to cover the landscape across America. They're the only agencies in the world that do both government, public schools, and private schools. And they have standards that are very similar across all 6. So there's comparability, there's consistency, and there's a track record. And it is a passport for a student that they can take anywhere in the world. Kids from outside the U.S. come to U.S. colleges because we have the best higher ed system in the world. They cannot get into U.S. colleges unless they come from an accredited, recognized school abroad, which means comes from one of the 6 regions. So it's unfortunate the policy change that Virginia went through. It is not serving your interest. What it is you misusing a term for performance in your accountability system. Those are 2 different activities. By the way, we just recently, and we continue to really help the educational community grow, yesterday, first state education agency in the history achieved accreditation, the North Dakota Department of Public Instruction. They went through the accreditation model. And that accreditation model required professional review from experts who understand how a state agency should operate and how a state agency can improve. That's the essence of accreditation.
And I should add, because I think we may not have been clear and we jumped right in, like I agree with all that, except what we call our accreditation system isn't actually functionally even an accountability system. And this is why we're overhauling it. So for example, again, the largest drops on NAEP, and you saw the drops on the SOLs during the pandemic, and the number of schools that were accredited like barely budged, like just a couple of percentage points. And that's just not a responsive system. And that, again, that gets reported, as Glenn Youngkin says, like there are actually objective facts in the world. That is one of them. It did not budge much. We had the largest drops. That's not a Glenn Youngkin says. That's an actual thing that exists in the world. And so what we are doing is bifurcating it. And so we're going to continue to have that system as a very baseline system. It will be meaningful. It won't address some of the issues that Mark just put on the table. And we're building a performance accountability system. That's a conversation you all should be involved in. It's happening right now. There are public hearings. It's out for public comment. At every grade level, elementary, middle, and high school, there's measures to help how our kids getting prepared for the next level. Like at the high school level, for instance, we're going to look at the traditional measures of college and career. We're also looking at military. Are kids prepared to have options if they decide to enlist and go into the service? It's some pretty exciting stuff, but that's going to actually be a performance accountability system the way that we think of that. When it is done, it'll also obviously have the basic, math and ELA and so forth. And so that's one step. It doesn't fully address the issues that Mark put on the table, but it will. You all should be aware of that. It's going to be a change, and we will start to be paying much more attention to that accountability system.
And that's exactly what you should call it. Call it a performance-based accountability system. Don't use any other label. It is what it is. And I think that's what I'm advocating is stop using the word accreditation. That's a local decision. Stop using it. Use the term what it is, performance-based accountability.
Well, if we thought we were going to get a boring panel on a Friday morning, we were deeply changed. This has been an amazing discussion. The next question that we have is in the very back here.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Randy and the entire team for a fantastic conference. Panel, you have been insightful and you have created a pathway for conversation. I would like to celebrate the fact that you have talked about a local option. So as the principal of Manassas Park Middle School, my name is Kip Tuttle. We certainly are seeking creative ways to employ people into our teaching positions, so this provides another one. So thank you for highlighting that. I'd also like to explore with you the idea that we incentivize students going into education. As we turn to our partners in the state of Virginia at our universities, we see a dramatic decrease in the number of students going into teacher education. Looking for pathways and incentives for students to envision themselves as teachers. Of course, we have Teach for Tomorrow. And in Manassas Park, we're lucky. We have a handful of young people who are coming back after graduating from college to return and be a part of our school system. But looking to further incentivize our students in the Commonwealth to become teachers, what ideas do you have, and how are you reaching out to our university partners to incentivize that? Is there a way that we can compensate our students who are interested in becoming teachers at a state level and re-energize it like we did once with Virginia is for Lovers, making Virginia the place to be an educator? Thank you.
I'll take a crack at that, and thanks for that question. First of all, this is so important. All of you need a Grow Your Own program in your high school. There's multiple ones. There's Educators Rising with PDK. There's Teachers for Tomorrow. You need to do one. One of the things I'm proudest of was setting that up in Fairfax and having that in almost every high school, and now having those kids come back. That's one thing you can do. We're telling superintendents as part of our new Superintendent's Academy training, our Virginia Transformational Leadership Academy, we're having them talk about Grow Your Own. We're working with BDOE and saying to superintendents, you must have Grow Your Own in your division. That's one thing. Number two, the medical world might be just as controversial or complex and exhausting as education. You could argue that, right? The medical world. Do you know getting in med schools, it's still like only 2 or 3% of kids get in. Like people are still actually applying to be doctors and physician's assistants, right? There's still the demand, partly because you can still have a lifestyle, right, that people consider. So it's still back to teacher salaries that we've got to make it compelling. And here's the big point I want to make. The medical world has something called residencies. You become a medical resident. VCU is doing this in Richmond, about $500,000. They're going through these cohorts where the teacher gets to be a resident. Many of them are IAs or support of your parastaff, or they can be people coming in. But you get a livable wage, right? We want people to give up their career, right? Take a year or 2 years to take courses and then get into a job that's already underpaying. So $500,000 in Virginia. New Mexico has $25 million for teacher residencies. We need to be first in the country for a teacher residency program, just like the medical folks do it. If it's good enough for doctors, it's good enough for teachers. It's good enough for VCU. It's good enough for every higher ed. And Virginia, this must be one of the things I thought that was a unifying thing about the grand bargain Andy talked about. There needs to be a grand bargain. We're not against accountability. We're for accountability. Fair accountability means the resources to deliver on the promises made to parents and kids. So we need a residency program for every higher ed and every area where you can grow your own. And then people, either through the Grow Your Own or even coming in, can have a residency because you get to watch that person for a year and determine if they've got the, quote, right stuff. Just like NASA and astronauts to space, we need teachers back in our public schools. The medical residency idea, that concept is the way to do it. So that's what I would share for you about that.
I want to chime in. Hello. Oh, there it works. I just wanted to chime in too and encourage you to reach out to your parent volunteer community. A lot of our parent volunteers have stepped out of the workforce at some point in time, and particularly as you come up into the secondary schools where their kids have gotten a little bit older, they're looking for a pathway to come back in. They love being in your school building. They love being there to collaborate and teach with you. And so reaching out into your parent volunteer space and creating opportunities for them and making them aware, educating them about those pathways. How do you become a substitute teacher, right? A lot of our PTA leaders go through the entire pathway, and then as you come into the secondary school space, they're looking around saying, well, what should I do? Should I go back to work? What type of work do I want to go back to? And you find that you've actually been sitting in this education space for the better part, of many years. Some of our, particularly our families with lots of kids, might have been involved in PTA or in volunteering in the school building for a very long time. And so I want to encourage you to also look for those pathways to educate your parent community about how they can become substitute teachers or come in and help and fill some of those gaps. And then back on the accreditation space that we've been talking about a little bit, and the accountability space, I think there is a true failure to effectively use technology to lift up and improve opportunities for our English language learner students. Right? We have, you can take your cell phone and hold it on top of something and automatically translate it just by holding your cell phone on top of it. We should absolutely have the ability to meet the needs of our English language learner community by allowing them to take standardized tests that are automatically translated into their language of preference. Let them reply back in their language of preference and have it be automatically translated. Given the way technology works, there's no reason that we should be requiring them to learn English to share the information that they've learned when we have such robust technology opportunities there. So I think that is the true, kind of ethics question, is why do we not allow them, when we know that they may have been, more comfortable responding in a native language, to do so when we have the technology to allow them to do that.
Yeah, just so you know, that's a state-specific, and we do testing for states like Massachusetts, and it's multi-language. Students take those standardized tests in Massachusetts in their native language. So it's not there's a capabilities there, it's just a choice by Virginia not to exercise that capability.
Thank you.